Well, hey guys, it's time for the midweek devotion. I'm Pastor Jason, and I'm excited to continue in the book of Hebrews. We're going to be reading in Hebrews chapter 11, and we're going to read verses 13, 14, 15, and 16 today. So Hebrews chapter 11, verses 13, 14, 15, and 16. These all died in faith. Now, these is talking about Abel, it's talking about Enoch, it's talking, or Enoch, if you prefer to call him that, it's talking about Noah, Abraham, and Sarah. Okay? These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. What this means by the things promised would be Jesus, salvation. But the Bible is clear to talk about how they've seen them from afar. They've viewed them. We know for a fact that most likely Abraham and Sarah would have had a conversation, most people believe, with Jesus in the flesh in the Old Testament. In their day, Enoch, of course, walked with God and then was translated into heaven. Noah had a conversation with God. Abel knew exactly what God wanted him to make as a sacrifice, so he was obviously able to have some form of conversation or walk with God. He was close enough to know what God wanted. Having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. We're going to come back to that, but that's super important. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. Now, they already had homelands, but they were seeking a homeland, and that's important. This is verse 15. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, and this is a really important part for those of us who live here and now in this day, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared them a city. Now, this is a really hard and deep part of this chapter, and it's kind of fascinating the way that God inspires the author of Hebrews to write it. The author of Hebrews goes through Jesus is greater than all these things in chapter 1 through 10. Verse 11, he begins these people who recognized that God was greater than all these things, and so they had amazing faith in God, and so he puts them down in what's called the Hall of Faith. Then in Hebrews chapter 12, it begins with this idea, therefore, seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every sin, every weight, and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto God, the author and finisher of our faith, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despised the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. And so it's this idea of Hebrews chapter 1 through 10, Jesus is greater than all these things. Hebrews 11, these people recognized it. Hebrews chapter 12, we need to recognize it and we need to live a certain way as well. But in the middle of Hebrews 11, he takes a break from pointing out people who have amazing faith, and he puts in this middle part about how they were strangers and exiles looking for a better country and a better city, and then he goes straight back into the people. What does that tell us? I hope it reminds us in America in 2020 that there's a better country that we are citizens of. If you are a Christian, if you are a follower of Jesus, if you have accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you are a citizen of heaven. And God just happened to call you to be his missionary to America today. The better country for you is heaven, and that's where you are a citizen of. That's where your loyalties lie. That's where your beliefs lie. That's where your aim, your focus, your heart, your mind should be focused on and looking at. Now that's easy to lose sight of when all we have is 24/7 conversations about either how great or how bad things are in America right now. It's easy to lose sight of when we want to start fixing every little thing that goes on in America. And I want to point out, I'm saying little things, not there are certain sins, there are certain injustices, there are certain problems that we as Christians, we need to be actively involved in our culture and in our world. We need to be the light. City that is on a hill cannot be hidden. You don't put a light under a bushel, right? We need to be the light. We also need to remember, though, that when things don't go the way we want them to, we have a better city, a better country awaiting us. We also need to remember then, if our main focus is that we are citizens of heaven, we need to live with that hope in mind for those who are discouraged. But also, we should be busy going about sharing the gospel more than we should be busy going about trying to solve every issue in America today. See, I think we can go one of two ways with this. We can be, as my dad used to say, so heavenly minded that we're of no earthly good. Where all we do is study the scriptures, focus on heaven, and never have any impact on the earth today. But we can also be so earthly minded that we are of no heavenly good. Where we are so consumed and wrapped up in the problems of earth that we forget to share the answer to the problems of earth, which is Jesus, which is also the answer to the problem of a bigger problem, eternity. At the end of the day, we need to understand that just in light of today, the conversations going on in this week, right? Whether we as the city of Columbus remain the city of Columbus, or we change to Flavortown, USA, or I heard someone wants to call Columbus Elbow Drop, USA. Whether we are in Columbus, Flavortown, Elbow Drop, whether there are statues or not, our faith is not in any of these things. Our faith is in Jesus, and our home is heaven. That's where our focus needs to be. So rather than countless conversations and rather than countless posts about how to fix and what our views and opinions and thoughts must need to be, and everyone needs to think like I do about this, let's start posting and talking about and sharing about how beautiful heaven is, how amazing Jesus is, how wonderful salvation is, because Jesus is our ruler. It doesn't necessarily matter who we elect as president. Jesus is our king. It doesn't matter necessarily where we live. Heaven is our home. God did appoint us to be missionaries here, and He picked you and I to be in this exact place, in this exact time that we are in. But heaven is ultimately our home, and Jesus is our ruler, and that needs to be our main focus. Hebrews chapter 11 says, they were strangers and exiles on earth. They were looking for a better home, a better country, a heavenly one. Let's have our focus. Let's have our thought process. Let's have our hearts be tuned into heaven. And in verse 16 it reminds us, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared for them a city. Believer, church, listen. Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you, and if it were not so, I would have told you. My Father's house are many mansions. He's building a city that is better. There is no racism in heaven. There is no injustice in heaven. There is no rioting in heaven. There is no coronavirus in heaven. There is no shutdowns in heaven. There is no economic downfalls in heaven. It's a better city made by a better ruler. That needs to be central to all of us. Let's let our focus be like these amazing people in Hebrews chapter 11 who were constantly looking to God, who was not ashamed to be called their God. Powerful words right there. Deep words. Words that should make us really think. That is in the middle of Hebrews chapter 11. By divine design, God placed that there for us to see it. And it was just as true for us today as it was for them, and vice versa. So I hope that this little devotional is a help to us. I hope it helps change maybe what we post about, maybe what we talk about, maybe what our heart dwells on. Maybe we stop listening and watching the news, and maybe instead we listen to some worship music. Maybe we listen to the Bible on audio rather than listening to people scream at each other on the news about their political view. Because our home is heaven. Let's live with that in mind. Listen, I'm really, really excited that this Sunday we're gonna talk about moving our families forward, and we're gonna use Noah and his family to do so. And I think it's gonna be really helpful. I think a lot of families, I'll say a lot of us struggle and have struggled through this time. And probably the ones who are like, no, not me, probably are struggling in ways you don't even know, you're not aware of. Noah and his family brought about huge change, and they moved the earth forward quickly after a huge disaster. And I want us to spend some time this Sunday at 11 a.m. talking about this idea that small people who do have small habits that are done consistently, who have small conversations regularly and are willing to make small sacrifices, can make huge growth in their relationships. I'm really excited to talk about this. I think God has given it to us very timely. And so I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll be there in person, because I think it's best to be there in person. Bring your kids. They won't bother me. Kids crying won't bother me at all. Kids playing won't bother me at all. That's how I grew up. That's how our church was growing up. So it won't bother me at all. And it won't distract me one bit. But if you can't watch in person, join us online. I still think it's a really relevant message, and it's needed. So I hope you'll join us either online, outside, or inside as we worship this Sunday at 11 a.m. Hope to see you there. Always remember, you matter, Jesus matters, grace matters, and details matter.